Welcome to In the Spotlight, where we take a moment from the fast pace of daily news to dive deeper into the issues and shine light on all that matters. I'm Shahar Azani, and today I would like to touch upon Israeli humanitarian aid. Over the last few decades, the world has gotten familiar with various aspects of Israeli mission going out onto the world to play a constructive role when calamity hits, whether man-made or nature-made. We have seen this in places like Kenya, Turkey, Haiti, Japan, and so many more places all over the globe. Some of this assistance is conducted by Israel's government, but much of it is the initiative of Israeli civil society and people who care. I am thrilled to have with me in studio one such person. Our guest today is Kahn, the chairman of Natan Worldwide Disaster Relief, a non-profit humanitarian relief organization based in Israel. A few words of introduction about our fascinating guest. Kahn has chaired Natan since 2015, after serving as executive board member, a role to which he applied his international relations and international development and educational experiences. As a former senior officer at Israel's Prime Minister's office, he served for 20 years in international relations and was posted in Africa, Asia, and Europe. He later served as Director of International Development at the World Orth Geneva office. Dani comes from the world of informal education in Israel and France and was directly involved in the rescue of Jewish communities in various Muslim countries. Dani, welcome, and so happy to have you with us in studio today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored.
You're visiting the US now, and before we dive into Natan and the purpose of your visit, allow me to ask you, talking to you before, I learned a very interesting fact about you, that your international care and outreach actually started with you in Tehran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, in 1979. Do share.
Well, I think that you may remember that early in 1979, Khomeini came back from France to Iran, and that was the Iranian Islamic Revolution.
So he was in France in exile?
He was in exile, protected by the French authorities, and was allowed to come back because of the revolution in Iran. It was quite a violent revolution at that time. And all of a sudden, the ties with Israel were cut in a day. And relations with the Jewish community in Iran were cut. Now, their life were really at stake. The danger was everywhere. And it was more than necessary. We had to try to make this relation again. So I was recruited. It was easy because I was a French citizen. I have a French passport. And Khomeini came back from France. So I flew to Iran a few times, trying to connect with the Jewish community there, to have new ties and to help them to escape as much as they could, and to help them, in fact, at that level. Right. So that was my first experience with connecting the Jewish communities in Muslim countries.
And humanitarian mission.
I believe completely humanitarian. Maybe the most risky of all. But it was so necessary, and it was so clear for me that that's the way I want to go.
You mentioned having a French passport. So that means you came to Israel as a new immigrant, Oleh Hadash. When did you arrive in Israel?
Well, I'm still an Oleh Hadash. I just came in 1968.
Right.
I was 18 years old.
Right.
And since then I'm in Israel. Yeah.
And you, coming to Israel, you joined the IDF?
Of course.
And you served where in the IDF?
Well, I came as part of Bnei Akiva at that time, the youth movement.
Right.
Joined the Nachal, I was an infantry guy.
Right, the Nachal Brigade. Yeah.
Yeah, and finished my service, and I served again as a reservist during the Yom Kippur War.
Wow. So you arrive as an 18-year-old in Israel in 1968. You join the IDF, you serve, you already find yourself in the traumatic war of 1973, the Yom Kippur War.
That was a little later.
Yeah, but
yes.
Yeah, 5 years after. And then 5 years or 6 years after that, you're already trying to rescue Jews out of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. What a hectic decade of, playing a role for Israel within and outside of Israel. How did that make you feel, in being involved in so much of that and at such an early age?
Feel it completely natural. That the education I received, I believe it's my character.
Seems so.
And when I was released from the army and until I joined the forces for the Yom Kippur War, I worked as a community worker in Netivot.
In the south of Israel.
The south of Israel, in a small city, challenged at that time. So it's the same process, the same mentality somehow.
So caring for people, and specifically caring for those in need, is part and parcel of who you are as a person.
I hope so.
It definitely seems so. Strokes of your personality from the very beginning. By the way, when you arrived in Israel, did your family join you, or?
They joined 8 years later.
8 years. So you preceded your family in coming to Israel. Yeah. Wow. And your career spanned, as we saw, many continents and a lot of activity, which hopefully we can dive into. But right now, I want to start touching upon Natan. You are now the chairman of Natan. First of all, before we go into the depth of what Natan is, how did you come into getting to know Natan, the organization?
Well, I had two careers. The first one was in education for 20 years. The second one was an intelligence officer for 20 years. And then I retired.
Right.
And then I joined World Out.
What did you do in the field of education?
Informal education mostly. Jewish community centers in Israel and in France. I led the French high school of Aliyat HaNoar in Israel. I was even the consultant for education of the chief rabbi of France for a few years. So quite a wide scope of education. Almost everything except standing in the classroom and teaching.
Right. And from those worlds of intelligence and informal education, where did you meet Natan?
I met Natan when I retired. But the first time was in fact in Haiti. 2010 was the earthquake. I went to Haiti on behalf of World Out for programs of rehabilitation after the earthquake. And I met the Natan guys on a soccer field close to the airport. There were military tents, which are schools. All the schools were destroyed during the earthquake. Wow. And these young guys of Natan and doctors and educators reorganized the education, in fact, for the children of Port-au-Prince. I was very impressed by the dedication, impressed by the professionalism. And then, when I retired again, I decided that that's my place.
Wow. And just to understand what Natan is, because you just hinted at who was there, tell us a bit about the organization. What is Natan? Where does the name come from? When was it established? What do you do?
First, Natan is, I believe, the face of the Israeli civil society. We are 100% professionals, experienced professionals, but 100% volunteers.
100%?
No one in Natan gets a salary.
No one?
None.
None. Admin, logistics.
Nothing.
Secretary, answering the phone. Nothing. 100% volunteers.
Yeah. Look, the overhead in Natan for all the administration is 6% of the budget. Wow. Meaning that 94% of donations of our budget goes directly to field operation.
Right.
That's quite unique.
When was Natan established?
Natan was established in 2004, but it comes earlier. And you may remember Abi Natan.
Of course, the Israeli peace activist.
Exactly. Abi Natan was a pilot, born in India, made Aliyah in 1948 to join the IDF as a pilot, and then retired. And in 1966, 1 year before the 6 Days War, Abi Natan decided that something has to be done to, let's say, to avoid the coming war. It was so tense, it was so clear that it's going to happen. And he decided to take off from Tel Aviv with his own small plane and to fly to meet with Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt,
right,
and tell him,
Egyptian
bring a petition of the Israelis that they want peace from the society, and try to avoid peace. And he took off from Tel Aviv, landed in Port Said, was nicely received by the Egyptian that simply put him back on his plane and said, no, you fly back to Israel. You won't meet anyone. But, and then he landed in Tel Aviv. But it was a success because all the world heard about it. And all the world knew that in Israel there is an important part of the society that wants peace.
Right.
The second stage, the second step, was in 1968. And you may also remember Biafra. Mm-hmm. Biafra was a terrible humanitarian situation in Nigeria,
right,
where people were really starving to death. And
it's still not the quietest of regions.
No, it is not. It's very tense. But at that time, it was really a war.
Right.
That's the time, in fact, that the world woke up on humanitarian. The first big operations of humanitarian aid started in Biafra. And Abi decided that he has to help. He hired a plane, filled it with rice and whatever food and whatever needed, recruited some friends, and reached Biafra and made a distribution and working with the community. That was the first Israeli civilian operation of humanitarian across the sea. And then when in 2004 was the tsunami in Sri Lanka and India, it was on this base that volunteers decided to get organized and come to Sri Lanka and provide the help.
And they called it Natan?
And they called it Natan on the name of Abi.
Right. So Abi Natan, and Natan his name, and
Natan, which is giving.
Right, giving.
So that's the name.
So that's a bottom-up effort of people who wanted to come together as professionals and volunteer to make a difference in the world and answer other people's needs.
Exactly. And it's good that you insisted on professionals, because I think that's the core of Natan. I'll give you the example of the last operation we had,
right.
Haiti. You remember the earthquake in August 14, 2021, a few months ago. We, of course, joined. But interesting is the team we had there. We sent 2 delegations. I'll insist on the second one, because I think that represents Natan at its best.
Right.
There were 4 people, 2 doctors, 1 social worker, and 1 logistician. Among the two doctors, Sharon, who participated in quite many operations with us, is the mother of 5. She is a doctor at the Poria Hospital in near Tiberias.
Right.
And she drops everything, let the children at home, and fly to help there. With her was Yael Livney, who was a doctor managing a clinic in the south of Tel Aviv. Dr. Eitan Shahar, social worker, lecturer in the university, and Oded head of logistics for Natan. Together, they took care of 2,100 people in the very remote village where no one is reaching any time. So that's us. People who take holidays on their own account and are ready to fly and to help.
Wow. So Natan is focused on, working with professionals for the benefit of the world. Talk to me about the professions themselves. What's the profile of the people you work with, and what are the services that you provide as an organization to the different communities you interact with?
Medical, which are doctors,
right,
nurses, and then the psychosocial element, which are social workers, people with a specialization in trauma, in resilience, working with the village to prepare them for whatever may happen, and to rehabilitate these villages. And then we have dentists and educators, and of course logisticians. So that's the scope of the professions. We have people who are all well experienced, come directly from their field in Israel. They are not disconnected from the profession, they're updated to the last day. And that's what they bring. And they bring the Israeli expertise.
The medical field everywhere, but definitely in Israel, is very hectic. The hours are quite insane. And you're telling me here that these professionals take time off of their schedules on their own account, vacation days, to go and volunteer with Natan. It's almost as if Natan is one of Israel's best kept secrets, because when you go out into the international field of public opinion, they keep on telling you that Israel is the epitome of all evil, and that Israel does this badly and does that badly. And if you stand up for social justice or justice at all, Israel must be discounted. There is no way you could be an Israeli, unfortunately today with the anti-Semitism, a Jew, and have any kind of points in favor of doing the right thing and social justice, even though that term, in my opinion, has been taken into very extreme neighborhoods. And you're telling us a story here, not just of Natan, the organization, but also of reminding us of AB Natan and really touching the heart of Israel. Because when you think of Natan as an organization, I look at you, Danny. And when I look at what you've done in your lifetime and what you've done for Israel and the Jewish people from a very early age, it seems like it was ingrained in you. So in your international work, when you meet people out there, what are the kind of reactions you receive when they know you're from Israel?
It's an amazing story. And I will give you the example of Serbia. The heart of the Syrian civil war. Millions of refugees crossing with the dream of reaching Germany or Sweden. And along this Balkan route, we opened a clinic, a medical clinic. And we were able to provide service to more than 4,000 Syrian refugees. Now, these Syrian refugees are all mostly Muslims, coming from a country in war with Israel. And we provided the best service.
What year was that?
It was 2015.
2015. And an Israeli organization arrives in Serbia to help the Syrian refugees. Who invited you?
The government of Serbia.
Did you reach out to them or did they reach out to you?
No, we reached out to them.
You reach out to them.
We did.
It's your initiative.
Definitely.
Any thoughts of going out and helping Syrians? Weren't you, I don't know, afraid or concerned, or did you have any concern doing that?
The concern that they will not accept us.
The Syrians?
Whoever. We had to do that because we can do that.
Right.
And that's the message. And then we built this clinic with local organization, as we do always.
You know, you just before you dive into Serbia, I think it's a good point to remind our viewers that the issue with the Syrian civil war was such that, first of all, the Poria hospital that you mentioned before, outside of Tiberias, also played a role in taking care of many Syrian, injured Syrians who actually came to the border with Israel and were picked up, taken care of without even knowing where they come from, which faction, which party, which political ideology, and they were taken back. That was an incredible demonstration of humanity on both sides of the border and real connection between people. And you are extending that help as Israel, not just a few Syrians on the border, those who make it and those who cross over, but also to Syrian refugees who are now in Serbia.
Yeah. And in fact, we are also in Syria, but that's I'll reach this point. So we created this clinic. It was in the camp called Preševo, was on the main route for the refugees. Among the more than 4,000 refugees, not everyone asked where you come from, but many did. And you know, when you provide medical care, there's a family around.
Right.
So the guy is suffering, is in pain, he doesn't ask any question. But his wife or the family around ask, well, you speak Arabic. Where is your Arabic from? Because I said, from Israel. We are Arab Israelis volunteering with Natan to help you. Among the more than 4,000 people, one guy came, don't touch me.
Really?
You are the enemy, I don't want you to touch me.
One guy?
One guy. The others, we heard a lot of things, including, oh, you are much better than Assad.
Assad, the ruler of Syria.
The ruler of Syria.
Were they surprised?
They were very surprised.
Were they interested, curious to, understand anything? Did they ask you anything about Israel?
Not a lot. You should remember that these people were really refugees on the move, meaning that they have so many concerns. They are so afraid of the day of tomorrow that other things are less of concern. But they surely appreciated the fact that Israeli came and relieved their pain. And
the epitome of people-to-people connection. The dream of all diplomacy is to create those connections between people on the ground, which is exactly what you do.
Yeah, and with many of them, the doctors who volunteered kept the contact, exchanged a mail or something. Many of them reached Germany. Many of them are still blocked in Serbia because the borders were closed. So we're here and there. Now I'm okay, now I found a job.
You whispered, I know you tried to kind of, as if we didn't hear you say, that you are actually active within Syria itself. Tell me more.
It was an operation run by a Christian American organization who, with the encouragement of IDF, decided to open a day clinic inside Syria across the border on the Golan Heights, on the Syrian side of the border, right, in order to serve the civilian around. Not all victims of the war, but definitely disconnected for all kinds of services. We joined them, we partnered with them, and we did two things. First, we invited doctors from abroad, because Israelis can't cross to Syria, naturally, but we invited doctors from abroad to volunteer, we had some, and we built a telemedicine system. And that was amazing. You had this farmer from Syria coming to the point, it was called Camp Ishai. Coming to the point, meeting a nurse, and then connecting by telemedicine, meaning by Zoom, computer, video chat, with a doctor in Haifa, with a specialist in Hadassah, all the Israeli hospitals, and getting whatever he needs.
With the nurse being on the ground.
With the nurse being on the ground. This nurse is a Syrian lady who is now in Turkey with her kids. We keep the contact, of course. But that was our post inside Syria.
Were you not... let's talk about the organization you partnered with. They're partnering with an Israeli organization to help Syrians within Syria. Were they concerned? Did they express any kind of concern with you, saying, we can't, we shouldn't, no. That didn't play a part?
No, it didn't play. I think these people are supporting Israel, good Christian.
They just want to do good.
And they wanted good professionals. They have a fantastic heart. They don't always have all the skills required. We have the skills.
Right. You said it time and again, an organization of professionals.
Yeah.
How do these professionals hear about you in Israel? Do you publicize? Is it word of mouth? How does it work?
Friends bring a friend. Social media.
Such Israel, yeah.
And we publish here and there, but people are coming, and not only from Israel.
So I want to touch on that point. The volunteers that you have, where do they come from? How many do you have? And how do you choose who can be part of it? I'm sure not anyone can. Like, there is a screening process. So how does that work on your end?
We have today 850 volunteers.
850?
850.
Volunteers. 100% volunteers.
Ready to deploy wherever we call them.
In Israel and beyond?
In Israel and beyond, we want more volunteers from abroad, and we invite, in fact, American professionals to join us.
So if anybody who's listening to us and watching the show now tells themselves, I want to do something, I want to help, I'm a retired doctor, I'm a retired nurse, educator, how do they reach you? Very simply,
natanrelief.org, NatanRelief.org.
Natanrelief.org.
And then you open volunteer, you have a long questionnaire, because we screen the people, we want good professionals.
Right.
We'll talk with them by phone, by Zoom, wherever,
and
we'll be invited. And we have now a program beginning in Colombia, just across the border for the United States.
What's the program? For Natan?
For Natan.
And what's the program?
The program addresses the refugees from Venezuela. Should remember that the crisis in Venezuela and the number of refugees is the biggest today in the world. Colombia accepted 2 million refugees.
Wow.
But along the border, it's a quite tense situation. And the first victims in all these situations are always the women, unfortunately.
Right.
So we decided, together with colleagues from Cadena and Hayas, to open a day center for women, providing all the services. It's kind of a safe haven where they can come on morning with their kids, meet a doctor, meet a dentist, discuss their psychological stress, get some activity for the kids, a cup of coffee, relax, try to disconnect from the terrible pressure that's waiting outside.
Right.
So that's a program that we are now opening, and we invite doctors, nurses, dentists to come and join us.
And that's happening this month?
That's happening now.
And how long is such a mission when you go ahead and do it?
Well, the program is for 3 years. We invite them to come for 3 years, but let's say a specialist that will come for 2 weeks.
So you're on the ground for such a long time?
Yes. Well,
of course, intermittently,
of course, but yes.
but as an organization,
yes,
your
that's our
presence there
commitment.
is continuous. That's a commitment.
Definitely, that's
because
a commitment.
a lot of people are of the belief that when it comes to humanitarian missions, it's usually a week in, a week out, 2 days, 3 days. No. In your case, this is a significant investment.
It is, and the fact is that we come for short periods after a disaster, but then we come again. Another case, Nepal.
Right.
I think Nepal is a good example of what we want to do.
First of all, what year?
Well, I never remember dates, but
the big
2016, I think.
Right, the big earthquake there.
Yeah, the big earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
We came within 72 hours, our team was there. And we...
By the way, independently. You make your way there independently of the Israeli government's assistance,
yes,
independently
completely.
of anything else. You go as Natan.
We look for a local partner.
Right.
We join them. And
that's also evident from what you're saying. It's always an issue with partners. You partner with other organizations, local, otherwise international. You work in partnership. Why?
That's the first priority, because of the sustainability.
Right.
We don't want to come, touch and go. We have to come and to do
that's
something.
Where you surprise me. You're talking about programs, missions that take place for a couple of years, not just a couple of weeks or a couple of months.
Yeah.
That's very interesting to hear. It's not something that people are used to hearing when it comes to, international aid, and that's great news.
Yeah, that's the continuation, right. That's the stability, that's the resilience. And so Nepal. So we came, and our teams worked all around. They reached the most remote villages in the Himalaya,
right.
sometimes by walking 4 hours with the doctor bag on the back.
Wow.
And the conclusion was that what they met in the Himalaya is a very challenging situation of pregnancy and giving birth. Meaning that no woman can walk a day or 2 days when she's just close to give birth
right.
to the closest medical center.
Right.
And then midwives are ladies from the same village who try to help.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the result is that Nepal has the highest rate of mortality among pregnant women and babies. Maybe not the highest in the world, but one of the highest. And we decided we have to do something. And the first thing was to train midwives.
So you come out for one need because of an emergency, you encounter a permanent need, and you don't just look away, you decide to do something about it. So what did you do? You trained?
So we worked first with the regional council,
right.
the local one. We invited 29 women who are in charge of delivering in the villages, and we built a 1-year program. And Shahar, you should see first the look in the eyes and the will of these women. So they came 3 times, the same group. First time for a basic training on hygiene and saving lives, right. and so on. And then they went back to their village, and they came back after 3 months. And we discussed, okay, what you learned, how did you use it,
right.
implement it? And we gave them a second training. And then we came back after 6 months and say, okay, now you have some experience. Let's see what was the influence, what the impact. And we completed the program, and they got a certificate. We did the same also in Nepal on gender-based violence to try to work with community workers and protecting the young women there. So that's the way we try to build things.
Do you keep in touch with those places? Let's say you did a mission there, you were there for a couple of years. Is there some sort of a continuous connection between Natan and these, let's say, midwives, for instance, or representatives?
Not enough. Not enough. We had a representative in Nepal. We keep the contact. We are following. Now with the COVID, it's a bit more complicated.
Right.
But I hope that in 2022 we'll go back to Nepal to work in one of these centers for a longer period of time,
right,
and train local staff.
But you are leaving people better off
We hope
wherever
so.
you visit. Try to provide long-term support, not just physical but mental, in order to make lives better on the ground. What countries has Natan worked in the course of its 17 years of existence?
Wow, long list. Started with Sri Lanka, and then we're in the Philippines, we're in Serbia, we're in Haiti, we're in Haiti again, and many more.
Yeah.
At my age, you don't expect me to remember all the names.
I have a hunch. I have a hunch you remember very well, but we understand the big picture. You talk about hundreds of volunteers from all over the world. How do you assign who's going to go where? Assuming something happens, how do you make that decision?
That's the assessment. The first team on the ground made an assessment of the needs. Together
So first there is a team that goes on the ground to assess what's happening on the ground and what are the needs. And
not to assess and come back.
Right.
That will be always a doctor, at least, a social worker, a logistic guy. That's the minimum of the minimum.
Right.
And then they come, they open the table to provide services, to give the medications, to discuss with the local leaders. And we're online. They say, look, that's the real need. We have to focus on mental. We have to focus on medical. We have to focus on education.
Before I please, let's remember to touch upon the selection of volunteers. I want you to talk for a minute about the mental help. You know, a lot of people attach aid, humanitarian aid and support to the physical needs of rescuing people from the wreckage or trying to reach people who are missing and give them immediate support. But you keep on mentioning the mental support that Natan gives. Tell us a little bit about that.
Shahar, remember where we come from. We are Israelis. You know the story of the people in Sderot.
Right.
You know the story of the people along the border in the north.
Right. Mental PTSD.
We have no choice but to develop a real expertise on post-trauma, on resilience, on community empowering. That's Israel. That's what makes us survive.
And that's officially part of your aid package. That's part of
absolutely.
What you do.
That's what we bring out. We have our own methodology, which is called the 6 C's method, was adopted by IDF and the Minister of Health in Israel as the best method to work with people on reducing stress and resilience. And that's what we bring. And I think that very few people in the world have the same experience, unfortunately maybe, that Israel had.
Right. And it's not just a by the way. So Natan, based on professionals, and in addition, we must remember, and I want to make this point clear to you, the viewers, we're talking about physical assistance, but also something that's really come to the forefront of international stage and societal life, which is the mental support given to people in need. And, you know, pre-COVID and definitely post-COVID, we see a lot of, need for such mental support. And it's amazing to hear that that's part of what Natan does.
That's really part of us. And look at COVID. Good example. We are connected with a group of social workers in Uganda, working with people in the slums around the country, in fact.
Right.
And then there was the COVID crisis, and the instructions were you should stay at home in quarantine for a week, like all the world.
Right.
I received a call from a social worker in Kampala. And he told me, look, how can I tell a kid to stay at home when he is homeless? He has no roof. So we decided to provide a training to the social workers how to deal with this kind of situation of the stress were much stronger with the more vulnerable population. And we did it by Zoom.
Oh, wow. International aid by Zoom. That's a COVID reality, but I'm sure one of the essential part of your work is being, boots on the ground, being there to help the people. You mentioned a little bit about the process. How do you choose the volunteers after the assessment team gets on the ground who are going to go on the different missions?
We build a program, and then we try to have on each team, and there are small teams. Should remember, we are a small organization, and we believe in small, efficient teams, generally up to 6-7 people. So we need a very experienced doctor. We need a less experienced doctor that will gain the experience.
Right.
We need at least one social worker, generally 2. And one in charge of logistics. And now it depends. If we have to deal with education, we'll bring 1 or 2 educators. We can bring a partner for education. You remember the School of Peace in Lesbos?
Right. Greece,
School of Peace in Lesbos addressed the worst situation of refugees in Greece in the last years. And we decided together with a partner to create the School of Peace with a very specific model where the teachers were refugees by themselves. Refugees teaching refugees in their own mother tongue. And we built this school, and then we partnered with the Shahar Azani, which is a youth movement, to operate it. And you had this complex team of refugees, Syrian, Afghani, African, working with Israeli young educators, all skilled educators, not simply a youth movement.
Right.
And the school accepted 4,000 kids along the years.
And you mentioned to me before that you have Arab Israelis, you have Jews. So let's think for a minute from Natan's perspective. You're actually a tool of cohesion also within Israel to bring together Israelis of all shapes and colors and creeds to galvanize together, helping others.
It is simply because we share the same values. And when you are working with Syrian refugees, what is more natural than to have an Arab Israeli who speaks the language, understand their mentality. It's natural. It's enriching everyone.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, I know we've touched upon this issue, but I think it's important for people to hear. I don't think Natan is known well enough. And here you are in the US, and we're so privileged here at JBS to have you, Danny. I just want to understand, what's your purpose? What are you going to do here when you're in the US? Where are you going to visit? Is there going to be an opportunity for people who are going to watch this, maybe now, maybe in the future? We know how to get in touch. What are you doing here now?
Well, I'm coming for 2 purposes. The first one is to connect with the Jewish community in the States and to be more known, and thank you for inviting us,
Sure.
because that's so important.
It's a pleasure having you.
And on both level of being known and getting support. Because at the end of the day, you are volunteers,
Right.
but you have to buy medications,
Right.
you have to buy flights, so it costs money. And we don't have a system of fundraising because we are all volunteers and we are all dedicated to the ground.
Right.
So that's one purpose, definitely to help funding the future operations. The second one is to meet with partners. And we have fantastic partners, including in the States. I'm not talking about partners who are working on the ground together with us.
As partnering organizations, like all of your, when you gave us the examples, many of these included partner organizations who came from different places.
Absolutely, including local, of course.
Right, very important.
Of course.
Local participation is crucial.
But you are so right that we are the best kept secret in Israel.
Right.
And it shouldn't be.
So you're here in JBS, you're going around to speak to partners and to communities. I urge you to do more, Danny. It's important that people get to know Natan as part of Israel's social fabric, because as you know, we live in an age where the attacks on Israel are continuous, and in a world of good and bad, there is a continuous attempt to put Israel, and to a large degree many parts of the Jewish community, on the bad column of the table. And they don't realize the differences don't mean bad, and Israel has beautiful shapes and colors, and one of the most prominent ones is its international aid and outreach, and everything that you're sharing with us today, Danny.
Yeah, and we believe in what we do, and we do it because we can do it. So again, wherever we are needed, we'll be there.
So again, for any doctor or any professional who wants to be part of your effort, who may be watching us now, they could go on your website, which is...
They should. Not they could, they should.
They should. And the website...
We invite them.
Let's remind people of the website.
NatanRelief.org. Very simple. NatanRelief.org.
And the next mission you're going to do is, as you said, Colombia.
The next mission is Colombia. We have an important mission in Israel now on dental care for people who can't reach any dental support.
Oh, my goodness me, that could be a camp you could do in the US. With the costs of dental care in America, there is a growing need, and many people can't afford dental care. It's ridiculous. I know it sounds ridiculous, and I think that's part of the greater debate here, but dental care, okay, fascinating to hear that you do within Israel.
We do it within Israel with really the most challenged population.
Right.
I'm not so sure if American dentists have the right by the Ministry of Health to work in Israel. I'll have to check that.
Right. But again, you're an organization of professionals. If there is one thing you know how to do, is be professional about what you do.
Absolutely. But dentists in Colombia, yes, we have to.
And I just must ask you, because I know we're almost out of time, and I can't believe how quickly time flies when you're having fun. But I want to ask you, where do you see, as the chairperson of Natan, where do you see the organizations in 5 to 10 years from now?
Still a small organization. We will remain a small organization because we want to be flexible. We will remain all volunteers. We have many more volunteers, but many more partners, and the means to do what we can do. We can't triple our interventions. It's only a question of money. And it's not expensive. That's the crazy thing. Just simply one figure.
One figure. Let's do it. One figure.
We're in Haiti now. We had missions for a month, as I told you. We provided help to 2,100 patients.
Right, you mentioned that.
The total cost of the operation was $38,000.
$38,000 to generate help for 2,100 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's Natan.
Amazing. Amazing. It's a small light that does so much.
But we need this $38,000.
Right. For sure. For sure. Yeah. Understood. Danny, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for taking the time and making the effort and for doing what you do. It's truly inspirational for myself and for everyone who listens to us.
Well, we believe that's the real Israel, and we're happy to do that.
Yeah. And I want to end with this note. I'd like to thank Danny for taking the time to join us and for providing us the inspiration. This is the real Israel, Danny says. And indeed, there is so much good that's coming out of Israel. And sometimes all that we have to do to find it is just look. And while you're looking, in the spotlight is the place to look, because that's exactly the kind of stories that we would like to feature. I'm Shahar Azani. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and I can't wait to see all of you next time in the spotlight.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.